Well, urine testing for anabolic steroids, as we said, the standard is pretty much, well, I have up there GC mass spec, but a lot of it now is done with liquid chromatography because it's even more sensitive, mass spec. Testing for testosterone, the ratio of testosterone to epitestosterone is important. Epitestosterone is made by a pathway different from the pathway that leads to testosterone. So think, for example, of the problem. Suppose an athlete takes testosterone. How do you distinguish that testosterone, which is exogenous, from testosterone that's made in the body? You probably wouldn't be able to, except for a little knowledge of the science and the biochemistry. Because the testosterone to epitestosterone, the T to E ratio, generally is around 6 or less. Sometimes maybe a little higher than that. But that's usually the standard, because a normal male will have usually around that ratio if they're not taking exogenous testosterone. But if they're taking exogenous testosterone, the epitestosterone, which is made by a different route than the normal testosterone, will be much less. So the T to E ratio may rise to above 10, 12, 14. That's one indicator. That's why they test for both in the testing labs. And some athletes have been caught on that basis. That's how they could definitively say that you've been using exogenous steroids. And also they can use radioisotope measurements. In fact, not even radioisotope, but C13 to C12 ratio. Because the steroids that come from the bottle, pills, tablets, have the ultimate origin in a plant. There's a compound called diasgenin, which is made by some sweet potato plants that are converted to steroids, progesterone and testosterone, in the manufacturing process. And those steroids that have an origin ultimately in plants have a different C13 to C12 ratio. Whereas when you make your own testosterone, there's a specified ratio because it all comes from, starting with acetate in the human. Then we have designer drugs, designer anabolic steroids, which complicates this whole situation. Drugs which can be made in clandestine laboratories. And it was, at least at one time, thought that you couldn't detect these because nobody had ever seen them. They're made in somebody's lab, a new compound that had never been described in the literature, so it would never be detected. Now, of course, the labs are wise to these compounds that you see here. The one I show there on the bottom left, tetrahydrogestrinone, THG, sometimes called the clear. This is the stuff that they found in Barry Bonds. And now there's even designer SERMs, the specific estrogens, receptor modulators. Well, these are the SARMs that are selective androgen receptor modulators. Here's one of them. This hasn't become a problem yet, but may in the future. Speaking about Barry Bonds, he comes in again with this book that came out, which was written by an investigative reporter in San Francisco about a company called BALCO. BALCO, which is short for the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative. BALCO was a lab that specialized in putting out these designer steroids. And they specialized in providing them to athletes like Barry Bonds. And this guy came out with a book called Game of Shadows, in which he detailed the goings-on at this company and how they provided athletes with these designer drugs designed to escape detection. Well, the company was put out of business. The grand jury, of which we spoke earlier, was constituted to investigate BALCO, and they put them out of business, and several of their executives were convicted and put in jail for their illegal operation. But so far, Barry Bonds has gotten away with it. He's only been convicted of perjury, hasn't been sentenced for anything, and may never be sentenced for anything. Some of the laws about that govern these performance-enhancing drugs. There's the Anabolic Androgenic Steroid Control Act of 1990, which placed anabolic androgenic steroids in Class 3, Schedule 3, which means they have some abuse potential, but not as great as stuff in Schedule 1 or 2. Opioids are like Schedule 1 or Schedule 2. Heroin would be Schedule 1, for example. But this is in Schedule 3. But the DHEA law, which you've probably heard about, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, places several of these steroids and other substances as well, like creatine and ephedra, under the cover of this law as a nutritional supplement. Well, people began to question placing things like DHEA and andro, which are clearly anabolic-related steroids. They're both formed in the pathway to testosterone in the body. And the Anabolic Androgenic Steroid Control Act of 2004 was passed. And that's what covers andro. This is the compound that Mark McGuire admitted that he took, but he said, hey, it was legal when I took it. There was nothing against it. So technically he's right. But now andro is covered under that law. But interestingly, DHEA is not covered under the 2004 Act. It's covered as a dietary supplement, even though it appears to have anabolic androgenic activity, because it is converted to testosterone in the body. And not to be cynical or anything, but when the debate was going on in Congress, on the in 2004 on the Anabolic Androgenic Steroid Control Act, the decision to not include DHEA under that may have been, I say may have been influenced by the fact that a very powerful senator had an interest in a company that made DHEA.
Somebody from Utah?
Yeah, it was a company in Utah. You know, and who's the guy in Utah? The senator, the very conservative Orrin Hatch, whose son was the founder of the company, the president of the company. You know, it kind of makes you a little cynical, but hey, that's life. But anyway, that's how that compound probably got exempted. Risk, we don't have time to go into risk. You can read about them. But there are some, I give you personal testimonies of some people who have well-known people who were fatally affected by use of anabolic steroids over the years. These are not inconsequential drugs. They can have devastating effects, and I list them for you there, and you can read some of those testimonies. A lot of this is anecdotal. Unfortunately, there's no case-controlled studies that you can conduct to determine this. But there's a lot of anecdotal stuff out there to indicate that there are hazards from using these. Oh, thank you very much.
Maybe there's time for maybe one or two quick questions. If anybody has a question? If not, thank you so much, Dr. Abramson.
Thank you. Thank you.